3, 2, 1. Over to you, Kate.
We good? All right. Well, good morning. I would now like to call to order the January 15th, 2025 meeting of the Indiana State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bess.
Present.
Ms. DeLosa.
Present.
Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest.
Here.
Mr. Gassnow.
Here.
Ms. Hamill.
Here.
Mr. Mapes.
Here.
Ms. Moat.
Here.
Ms. Rentschler.
Here.
Mr. Watts.
Here.
And Dr. Jenner.
Here. Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
The motion and a second. Any discussion?
Do you want to do officer slate now or you're late?
You know what, BJ? Maybe we should do that. I was just going.
I keep rolling. I wasn't stopping.
Okay, so we'll hold on that motion in second. Do we have a motion for the 2025 State Board of Education officer slate?
I will make a motion to keep the same slate that we have, Katie Jenner as chair, Katie Moat as vice chair, and William Durham as secretary. I'll second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I guess we'll stick around. All right, and now let's go ahead, since I was full throttle before going through the agenda. Let's go ahead and,
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
and any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the December 11th,
So
2024
moved.
meeting? Motion and a second, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, well, Happy New Year, welcome back. I hope, my toes are still frozen from walking outside. I don't know if yours are as well. It is, what a start to January for our state, but especially for our schools. The southern part of our state, I know BJ in Evansville, you had a ton of ice. A lot of people lost electricity. Of course, I live in the southern part on the other side of the state. Katie Moat does as well, and we had just a lot of snow. So the southern part of our state, ironically, is the one that got hit. Usually it's Iris up in your neck of the woods.
We got some lake effect.
Okay,
It was
okay.
white out yesterday. I almost didn't drive.
All right, all right. But I just know that on behalf of the board, we just want to give a huge shout out to all of our schools, the leadership, also the parents and families who are going on 3 weeks, had 3 weeks with their kiddos, and I know we're ready to get them back to us. We're ready to have them back as well. But it was quite a week where our schools, educators were shuffling to make sure learning continued. And so hats off to everyone who worked through that. Also, last month, we were thrilled to help name 2 Indiana teachers as recipients of the Milken Educator Award. The Milken Educator Awards are known as the Oscars of teaching. It's a $25,000 award, and I see Dr. Estes back there. She runs point for us on this, but we were able to give 2 teachers in Indiana this surprise $25,000 Milken Award. One is Katie Lanter, a 7th and 8th grade reading teacher. She teaches English language arts at South Ripley Junior High School. And then the other was in DeKalb County, up at DeKalb High School, Ashley Johnson, who's an entrepreneurship teacher. Both of them had a surprise visit right before the holidays with a $25,000 prize to thank them for all that they have done. Also, December 31st, as you know, board members, every year by December 31st, we have to announce graduation rate. That's in statute. And so at the end of 2024, on December 31st, we announced that Indiana had the highest graduation rate in the history of our state on record. We had 90.23% of the class of 2024 graduate high school. That's up from 88.98% in 2023, but I think notably for the board, that's up 3% since 2019, which was, of course, pre-COVID. 2019, it was 87.29, and again, today it's 90.23%. We are seeing increases in nearly all, if not all, of our student populations: Black students, Hispanic students, white students, English learners, students in special education, and students receiving free and reduced lunch. So huge win for Indiana as that rate continues to go up. Board members, on that note, next meeting in February, we will have our NAEP scores. Those scores come out at 12:01 a.m. Anybody wants to be up? You're up at that time. You can look. 12:01 a.m. on Wednesday, January 29th. And we'll certainly have some things to talk about here in Indiana. Also, as many of you know, we have a new governor. Governor Braun was inaugurated on Monday, so we're 3 days, really kind of 1.5 days if you consider that happened midday on Monday, into a new governor's term. It was of course a real honor to work with Governor Holcomb in the past, and I am pumped to work with Governor Braun in the future. He is definitely willing to sit at the table, have the tough conversations, and seek solutions, and education is one of his top priorities, specifically reading and math, rethinking high school, teacher compensation, a lot of the work that we frequently discuss. Also, in December, as a board, it seems like forever ago that we passed the diploma rule. I don't know about you all, but in December we passed the diploma rule, and within that we had some immediate action items that we needed to deliver to the state of Indiana, one of which was eligible course titles, and we promised that by the end of December. So that did go out to schools throughout the whole state. I can't remember the exact date. I think it may have been December 13th or December 20th. And so those are out there, and we're asking for feedback, like, did we miss any? Should any that are on this list that we should relook at? So that is out there right now for schools. And it looks like we have a JOT form where schools, parents, stakeholders can provide feedback through January 31st. Today, we will hear from Ron Sandlin, Deputy Chief for Quality Education at DOE, about the future of accountability. And on that note, any board member comments or reports? All right, seeing none, and I think do we have public comment? No, I thought you said that you were walking towards me, so I thought maybe we do. No public comment today. So let's move to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
The motion and a second, any discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, so let's get straight into accountability. Ron Sandlin, welcome up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenner. And I will say, as always, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to each and every one of you all. And like most often, I stand here merely as a representative of a lot of incredible people and incredible work, so I'd be remiss if I didn't, before I start, thank the countless educators, school leaders, advocates who we've consulted with over the past 12 to 16 months on what you're going to see today, and will continue to partner with in the future, as well as our team at the department, who has balanced graduation rates and other requirements that we have, while also engaging in critical conversations to get us where we are today, including our Director of Accountability, Mary Hannah, who's behind me, who's been instrumental in what you're about to see today. So it's a privilege to represent them in this work. Excellent. So today, we are going to introduce a recommended framework for Indiana's next accountability model. It's important that we position today's conversation in a larger context. And so we're going to start by grounding in the work that we have done that is providing a really strong foundation for this work. But I also want to make sure that people know that this framework is to initiate a much broader critical discussion to take us from a recommended framework to a final model. So what you see today, we hope will provide key insights into decisions that we are considering at the department, key shifts in accountability from old to new, and ignite thought and input from across the state so that we can collectively and collaboratively define the future of state accountability in Indiana. So after grounding ourselves in where we've been, we're going to set out some clear design priorities so that we all know the benchmarks with which we are operating. We'll go through some of those key shifts at a high level from the original or current model, if you will. Some people call it the old model because it's been a while, and where we want to go into the future, and then finally lay out our next steps as a department to take us from this recommended framework into a final model. So as we think about this work, it becomes clear that we are operating in a new era of education, and therefore we must operate in a new era of accountability. We cannot rely on how things used to be and expect this model to contribute to the vision we have laid out for students in Indiana, which is an aspirational vision of what we want it to be. The department, with your support, has captured that vision already, thankfully. We have a lot to build on in the Indiana GPS student profile, which really pushed and received national attention for doing so, that there is an important balance to strike between traditional academic knowledge and skill development. That as we move forward, we need our educators, we need our schools to be thinking about, and we need our systems and our policies to be promoting an experience that not only elevates traditional knowledge, but also helps students develop those post-secondary skills that we know and we're hearing and we've heard from broad stakeholders are essential for their future. You all did that work. We've laid out a strong vision, and our schools are already implementing and trying to figure out how to expand their opportunities to ensure that their students are not just reaching academic mastery, but building those key skills around work ethic, communication, civic, financial, and digital literacy. As we move forward, our accountability model has to reinforce that work. We cannot create a system that deviates or creates alternative pressures, since many schools are already well on their way to succeeding under this vision. Next, we've taken that vision and translated it into an accessible, universally accessible, public-facing performance dashboard. Indiana is one of the few states that has intentionally designed an online tool that is not a series of Excel spreadsheets or complex visualizations, intentionally designed for accessibility so that the average Hoosier can log on and find critical information about the performance of their school aligned to that profile. So we've, as one of you all have put it, we've democratized the data. But we also recommend that for the average person, that level of content might be a little overwhelming. So we need to make sure that our next accountability system complements the dashboard, that it helps people understand the information that's included in the dashboard in a more digestible way, but also sends people back to the dashboard to learn more. Because I think every accountability model, no matter where you are, is always going to leave something on the table. It's always going to leave something on the table. And this GPS dashboard allows us to say, if you want to learn more about the school, you can go here and find almost anything you need, longitudinally and even outcomes. And luckily, our partners in the General Assembly endorsed this concept. They passed legislation to direct the department to make a recommendation for a future ADF accountability model that builds on the work of the Indiana GPS dashboard explicitly. That law also directs the Department of Education to consider 3 key features. One is student participation in work-based learning on the dashboard. The second is credential completion on the dashboard. And third and finally, students' post-secondary aspirations, or the pathway that students are on once they complete high school. And we really feel that all of our work aligns with what the General Assembly has directed us to do, and it's really important that our framework also aligns with what they've asked you to do. So we've worked very hard to align our framework to that. So that's Indiana GPS, strong vision, aspirational, getting the data out there. Let's start a conversation. And we did. We absolutely did. And that conversation transitioned into a robust, I'm talking down in the weeds, nitty-gritty work around rethinking high school. Because we set this aspirational vision for blurring the lines, right, and making sure that our students were absolutely finishing K-12 post-secondary ready, we were able to have and facilitate a robust conversation about what high school should look like that materialized as revised diploma requirements. As Dr. Jenner just mentioned in December, you all just approved. So the key piece here is the diploma requirements reinforce what Indiana GPS introduced, that it's not just about traditional knowledge, that there are multiple pathways to be prepared for life after high school, and that our diplomas need to recognize and elevate the great work that's going on to ensure students reach that. It is, yes, traditional knowledge, but it's also skill development. And there's an important relationship between those two things that manifests for a student who wants to go to college. That balance might look a little bit different, and it might manifest differently for a student who wants to enter the workforce. And it also manifests differently for a student who wants to enlist to serve as a pathway to post-secondary success. And I think we've illustrated that balance very well in our diploma seals. You can look across those seals. Every single one includes rigorous benchmarks that are going to ensure our students are prepared for post-secondary success. What they don't do is create a universal expectation for every kid, because we know there are multiple pathways to success. So striking that balance between traditional knowledge and skill development relative to the individual student is something that we are critically trying to align our accountability model to, because the last point I'll make on this is that the benefit of going around the state and getting feedback is we also get to see the great work that people are doing. Dr. Jenner saw several. We talk about them. We elevate them here at this board. And our accountability model must accelerate that work. It must find those folks who are implementing Rethinking High School and encourage them to go further and encourage others to look at them. We cannot have a model that puts any headwind against that work. And so as we move forward, as we build upon where we've been, it's critical that our model is intentionally designed to promote and accelerate the great work we've seen throughout the state. So in addition to this really strong foundational and policy accomplishments, thanks to each and every one of your leadership, the department has spent the last 12 to 16 months engaging with stakeholders, facilitating comprehensive longitudinal data analyses that track student outcomes back to high school and say what really mattered in high school for a student who went on to college, for a student who was employed after high school. We've reviewed and revisited Indiana GPS. We've been driven by state statute, and as I mentioned, those diploma requirements. So within that entire ecosystem of considerations, right, today, I hope to present to you an initial framework, as I mentioned, a recommended framework for the future of A2F accountability in the state of Indiana. But this is not the beginning of the conversation, but it is critical that we are nowhere near a final model. So we need your feedback and we need your input. We hope that today we can elevate key principles so that we can provide a clear landscape, that every single individual who wants to provide input knows exactly what we're looking for and knows how to provide that input. So with that, without further ado, let's dive in. We'll start with our design principles. So after working through and grounding in Indiana GPS, thinking about the policy accomplishments that we've had so far and the direction from the General Assembly, we've decided on 4 key design principles for the future of accountability. First is student-centered. And I think it's really important that we define what we mean by that. And it's illustrated and captured in the diploma requirements. that our accountability model must encourage schools to look at the accomplishments of every single individual student and make a determination of whether or not they are on track for post-secondary readiness versus how accountability has traditionally treated it, which is looking at school-wide performance on individual indicators. So when we say student-centered, what we mean is we want a model that focuses on the accomplishments and the interaction of traditional knowledge and skill development at the student level versus how does a school get all kids to do an indicator. It's a key shift, it's a critical shift, and it's going to be an important shift. It's going to be challenging. The next is to increase transparency. The model has to be digestible and understandable. It must align to Indiana GPS so parents feel that seamless connection between this school received this letter grade, let me go find additional information about that school, and they need to understand that relationship. It also needs to provide actionable feedback. So right now, our model really groups together grades, and we'll talk about this, grade bands, and really almost provides a lot of lagging indicators that are difficult for schools to take action upon. The Indiana GPS dashboard has an authenticated version, so we've really started to help introduce performance data into the schools that are actionable, but it's critical that our accountability model builds upon that to help schools see, are they meeting the expectation? So they have access to the data, great. Is our data telling us that we're meeting, that we're making progress towards, or do we have work to do when it comes to the statewide expectation? And lastly is data-driven. And data-driven, also research-driven, that every single piece of this model must be informed by either longitudinal data analysis that we conduct here in Indiana or robust, well-supported national research that these things matter for kids. And as we go through, I'll point out how these design priorities are manifesting in this initial framework to help make some connections and illustrate concretely what we mean by each of these four. So within those four principles, those four priorities, we got to work on the key shifts that we expect to see in a final model as a part of this recommended framework. The first is thinking very intentionally about how we group and think about the model across the entire K-12 continuum. This is heavily influenced by Indiana GPS, which laid out a continuum of performance indicators, and we've actually benchmarked some of those indicators along the way. We've already elevated, there are certain stages of a student's K-12 career that matter significantly, and schools should focus on particular things at those levels. As you see, our current model groups 3 through 8 all together, and the model treats all grades, all kids largely the same. Then it shifts and groups 9 through 12 all together, and while it's not exclusively reliant on 12th grade indicators, it is disproportionately reliant on 12th grade indicators that come to the school almost a year after a student graduates. So when we talk about actionable, right, that was one of our design principles, we found and reflected that our current models oftentimes doesn't provide on-time data to schools, and it doesn't incentivize and reinforce those key benchmarks throughout the K-12 continuum that inform their actions pursuant to every single child. So we are thinking about the grade bands slightly differently. We know that in 3rd grade, there are just foundational knowledge and skills that every student in Indiana needs. We have to call that out separately and distinctly to align to this state's priorities around primary literacy and the critical importance of building that strong foundation so that every student has access to every pathway. Then as students progress into grades 4 through 8, we really want to incentivize building on that foundation. So how do we stack on top of that foundation the knowledge and the skills students need as they continue to explore their own personal interests, but also the opportunities that are available to them in this world? So it's a slight shift in that elementary middle phase to pull out that primary work, as well as thinking critically initially about that 4 through 8 and what students should be doing during that stage to set themselves up for success for high school. And then you get into the high school area, where we're introducing 10th grade as a key benchmark in that high school journey for 2 reasons. One, we need to make sure that our model provides actionable data and timely data for schools, to react to and help students along their way. Obviously, schools have immense data at the local level. What an accountability model does is it provides them a universal check to say, is your data meeting the statewide expectation, and inform their actions locally to help reach that goal. Secondly, it allows us to be more student-centered. By providing that checkpoint at grade 10, giving the flexibility with the high school diploma, we really incentivize schools to stop and pause and say, all right, at 10th grade, where are our students? Is everyone on a path? Does everyone have a plan? And do we have the capacity to support that plan? And our accountability model will incentivize, encourage, and celebrate those schools that are effectively doing that, as opposed to now waiting until the very end and saying, well, you got there or you didn't. And so that's a key design principle of this proposed framework as we move forward. We want folks to help us think through, what does that then mean for accountability at the 3rd grade? What does that then mean for accountability at 10th grade relative to GPS, relative to the new diploma requirements? Excellent. So that's one key shift. Thinking differently about how we structure accountability so that it is incentivizing and reinforcing the different key critical benchmarks throughout the K-12 continuum. The second is that balance that I mentioned earlier between knowledge and skill development. So the current model within that framework, grades 3 through 8, it exclusively focuses on academic mastery as measured by iLearn performance and academic growth. It disproportionately, and some would argue exclusively, emphasizes that traditional knowledge. And again, as we think about Indiana GPS, we've really thought about elevating those skills. And in the high school space, we go a little bit further. We still are strongly rooted in traditional academic mastery, and we've introduced other measures of skill development. However, there's opportunities to better align those expectations to the expectations that we've set out in Indiana GPS and the diploma requirements, specifically this. 1, the College and Career Readiness Indicator currently encourages students to explore coursework. We know that our expectation is now that students are completing credentials. Secondly, the graduation rate really emphasizes earning a diploma, where we've passed graduation requirements that emphasize earning a seal. So how can we elevate and strengthen those measures of skill development in the high school space to better align to the policy frameworks that we've put in place? So what does that look like? Well, let's start with grade 3. We have a great foundation with Indiana GPS. Traditionally, we've measured knowledge using iLearn, but we have other metrics available to us on GPS, including 3rd grade literacy as well as student attendance. Now, early on in a child's career, the flexibility within this model and the balance between traditional mastery and skill development might not provide much flexibility, as we need all students to be building a strong foundation. But as we go forward, you'll see in this framework that we start to introduce additional opportunities for students to demonstrate skills. Those additional opportunities are meant to provide flexibility for schools to meet students where they are. So let's jump to 4 through 8, and you'll see that list on the right, those indicators of skill development start to grow. In the bold, those are already measured by Indiana GPS. Below those, we're considering additional metrics that aren't on GPS that would give schools and students an opportunity to demonstrate their preparedness. And again, in grades 4 through 8, we're still focusing on building that knowledge and setting all students up for success. So the flexibility becomes a little bit broader, but you will see most of those indicators are rooted in knowledge development. It's just that students have an opportunity to demonstrate it through different types of knowledge. Let me give you an example. A 6th grade student who excels in math and loves science, but struggles for whatever reason to engage in content, grade level content literacy at rigorous levels that iLearn and our academic standards demand. But that student passed the iLearn science assessment. That student has demonstrated skill development. They have demonstrated a level of competency associated with their passion and their direction that our accountability model, we hope, should value. But I want to distinguish this very carefully and very clearly. Those indicators of skill development would not become universal expectations for every student. However, every student would have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their skills. So the way that we're thinking about this balance in this framework is traditional measures of academic knowledge, and on the right, multiple opportunities for students to demonstrate success. Not every student is going to accomplish the same things. That is laid out in our entire vision. But all students can accomplish something. And then we go beyond and we get into 10th grade, and this is a new area, as I mentioned. That's a shift in accountability. So we start to think about what are the skill developments, what are the indicators of skill development in those early high school stages? And then what is a good measure for academic mastery? Because we don't have a statewide standardized test in 9th or 10th grade right now. And the research tells us unequivocally, a strong start to high school is a critical academic benchmark for long-term success. University of Chicago has done immense research over decades to solidify the role of getting a strong start in high school. And what would it mean when we talk about actionable data, right? I said I'm going to go back to those priorities, to provide schools information on which students are on track and which students are not, who needs support and who doesn't. Simultaneously balancing that measure of academic mastery with those indicators of skill development. As we start to get into this space, we start to increase the options. And one that I'll point out here that's listed below the GPS indicators is the PSAT. For consideration, of course, but 90+% of our students currently participate in the school day PSAT in 10th grade, and the state pays for it. We're not in the business, and we are not interested in mandating more standardized tests. However, with 90+% of our students participating in that rigorous exam, should our accountability model not promote and celebrate schools for getting students above the bar? Now, we know not every student will pass that bar. Not every student is on an enrollment pathway. But for those students who do, how can our model celebrate that for those schools and those kids? How can our model make it so that when schools meet the individual needs of students, their overall performance letter grade and their performance category goes up? As opposed to what we've heard many times, that schools have to meet the demands of the accountability model, sometimes at the expense of the individual student. So this model really starts to introduce this concept of flexible opportunities to demonstrate skill development to complement traditional academic mastery. And finally, we get into 12th grade, and this one, thank you for the diploma work. Because the diploma seals have put a clear line in the sand and said, this is what we want for Hoosiers in Indiana. We started with the end in mind, and this is what has driven this entire model, which is, yes, we need academic mastery. Yes, we have a measure of academic mastery. But when a student graduates, there is far more that they are completing high school with, and we demand that they complete high school with far more than just academic mastery. Our future demands it. Right? Our workforce demands it, and our new requirements demand it. So what does it look like to elevate those diploma seals? If a student completes a diploma seal, that is a clear signal of skill development. Every one of those seals is rigorous. But we know, right, that not every student is going to fit one of those three boxes. We have to lay out policy. So then how do we also give students the opportunity to kind of package together key experiences, the building blocks of those seals, to also demonstrate skill development? So you might not complete all the requirements of the seal, but you did work-based learning, you earned a credential of value, and you showed up to school. You might have missed a course here, or maybe you were short an hour of work-based learning here to get that plus seal, right? But you've still demonstrated significant progress towards skill development, again, to complement that academic mastery. So before I transfer over to talking about next steps, I want to really reinforce the point that I think we're trying to make in this recommendation. And that is that in order to be successful, in order to reinforce and accelerate the great work that's happening across this state, we have got to figure out a way to balance traditional measures of academic mastery and indicators of skill development. And we have to do that in a way that centers the kid, that provides flexibility and options for schools to center the child versus centering our model. And if we do that, we can accelerate the great work that we all started with diploma requirements, but that our schools began years ago, right, as we laid out the vision for Indiana GPS. So with that, we'll go into our work ahead. As I mentioned, we've already conducted significant data analysis. Now that this framework is out there, now that we've laid out concretely our design priorities for the future of accountability, we will begin intentionally engaging with stakeholders throughout the state, leveraging our partnerships that we developed through the graduation requirement conversations, We will partner directly with each and every one of you and your constituencies and your stakeholders that you engage with to make sure that we take this recommended framework to a concrete final model that aligns and perpetuates, promotes, and accelerates the fantastic work that's happening across the state so that every Hoosier student graduates prepared to succeed in life. With that, I'll kick it back to you, Dr. Jenner.
Yeah, let's open it up for some discussion. So questions, thoughts. It would be, I think, helpful as a board if we think about what do you want to highlight as certainly we need to include, but also what are we missing? And this is now the time to really open discussion and hear everyone's thoughts. And Iris, you're leaning in, so I'm going to pass it to you first.
Thank you, first of all, for this work. I think it's really exciting, and it does reiterate the need for the new diploma that we just passed, so I'm really excited about it. One thing that kept coming to mind over and over again is in education, we're always looking at lagging indicators versus leading indicators, and I wonder if there's a way in this, you can't always, obviously we're not in the business of telling schools how they do what they do, but even providing guidance on, okay, these test scores or these work-based learning hours, those are really lagging indicators that we collect at the end of a kid's experience. What are the leading indicators in how they are engaged in their work that indicate they're going to have good measures at the end? And so I think to take this work just a slight step further, I think will help us reinforce what we end up at the final, at the end. And the other aspect I just want to mention is so often, especially in today's world with information available as it is, it's not what we teach, it's how we teach. And how can we create a measure that helps reinforce the actual pedagogy and the way students are engaged in classrooms? I think that's a big, hairy question, but something we need to think about.
And you might need to think about this a little bit, Iris, but it would be helpful if you have any ideas or others have any ideas about potential leading indicators that should be considered. So just food for thought.
I will definitely do that.
Thank you. All right. Who else? BJ.
I'm going to echo some of that. I love the grade bands in here. I really like that a lot because I think it lets everyone see kind of their role in that student's K-12 journey, whereas sometimes a lot of elementary teachers don't see themselves contributing to the success of a high school student. But I love the on-track indicators we have. And I'm going to propose a problem with no solution, so I'll apologize in advance. But I would love to see, especially in that K-1-2, what are those metrics that kind of lay out what we know where we want to get to in grade 3. We want students to be able to do general math and read and comprehend. So what are those metrics that we can use to say, okay, this student's on track? Because the thing I love most about this, and I will say really good work, is accountability has gone from this viewed gotcha system to truly a tool for getting better. And that's what this should be. I want an honest evaluation. If you're not getting it done, I want to know that. But we're not doing it to get you. We're doing it to make sure that the students in your building are getting the best that we can do for them. And when we say you need to improve, it's not saying you're not doing really good work. We're just saying, how do we continuously improve on what was already really good in most cases to do that? My advice, again, I'm a Southern Indiana guy, is keep this simple. Are the students in our buildings getting better while they're there? And what are things that schools can control, and make sure that we put that in there. Again, the grade bands is probably my favorite part of this because I love how it truly creates a K-12 vision, even into those higher ed certifications. It truly K-14 basically. But this is a really, really good launch. It's so aligned to GPS that I'm excited about it. Good job.
Thank you, BJ. William.
To kind of piggyback off of BJ, I'm wondering if there is any consideration that can be given to schools who opt into iRead at grade 2. What types of benchmarks or accountability can those schools get for those students who are passing that in grade 2, just to kind of further expand what BJ talked about in reference to those lower grade levels.
Well, and just to kind of push and pull on that a little bit, and listening to both of you, it could be another metric as well. What I hear you both saying is there something in the K-1-2 space, whether it's a leading indicator, in that case it might be, or a lagging indicator, that we could also elevate to support, essentially making our system better. That's what I think I hear
That's
you say,
perfect.
whether it's that or something else.
I think what we don't want is an autopsy at 3rd grade to say, oh, BJ doesn't have it. Well, okay, did we know he didn't have it in kindergarten and 1st and 2nd grade, and what he didn't have, did we put together a plan to fix what he didn't have? So I don't want, again, I want to know if you're on grade level, 100%. I don't want purple ribbons. But I don't want to wait to that point for that to be the first metric that we're like, oh, BJ's behind.
Okay, yeah. And I would just challenge, I don't know that many people are listening today, full disclosure. But I would, a lot going on. I would challenge the 5 people who are listening, or those in the room, like the other 5, if you have ideas about potential K-1-2 indicators to elevate, we're all ears. And Katie, you were leaning in.
Yes.
Okay, I'm watching your emotions.
So what's something that I thought the team did really well when we were moving through the iterations with the seals and the diplomas were some of the examples. And sort of like the student, like here's an example of what this concept might look like in the classroom or with a student. And I think that would be really helpful, like a pressure testing mechanism. Like when I look at the 4-8 mastery plus indicators, or the same thing as we look at grades 10 and above, to make sure we've set up a lot of rigor with these seals. And with the enlistment and enrollment seals come to mind in particular. And I would love to see some examples so we can sort of pressure test and interrogate that looking at the progress is not sending a false signal of attainment or proficiency. And that is the thing that that's where I'm excited to dig in and learn more. I think that's a risk that we're gonna have to work really hard to mitigate. I think it's absolutely doable. I just think that's something that we're really gonna have to dig into and guard against as we look at this.
Katie,
Yeah,
is,
good point.
can
Yeah,
I
go
ask-
ahead, Ron.
can I just ask a clarifying question to
Please.
make sure that I understand what you're saying, Katie,
Sure.
as I make sure our next iterations, respond and react to your feedback? What I'm processing you saying is really grappling at the student level, right, student examples throughout that continuum, to ensure that our measure or our definition of on track is truly on track. That's how I process that.
100%, like something that I think could happen is when we look at, like, taking an example with, high school. You're struggling to pass an assessment, critical assessment. And I know the world has changed and so much is test optional. But we want to make sure, like, we put these different earning a credential and work-based learning because it's what the world expects. And so if you're continuing to show a lot of exciting progress, I wouldn't want to be sending you a false signal that the reality is, institutions expect that you have attained these things. And employers expect that you can not only try really hard, but you can actually perform. And that's why we've made these other changes. And so what we're measuring and the signals that we're giving need to be honest and authentic as well about the point where growth is not proficiency, it's not mastery. Because that's what we have to get to. And so that's the tricky balance. You started with that. You kind of glossed over it. Like, that's the work. Like, that is the hard part. Like, what we're taking on that's the meat right there, is figuring out how to do that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, Pat.
Well, and does that kind of lead into K-3 of, what do we want a kindergartner to be able to do? What do we want a first grader to be able to do? And make it more like performance task instead of assessment. I don't want to test them. We We have great experts in front of them every day. They're called teachers. And let's just lay out that these are the skills that these kids need to be able to perform at. So that kind of becomes the on track for literacy and mathematics at the K-3 level. And then we lean in hard on I Read 3 like we currently have, and maybe that becomes the assessment for third grade, as well as maybe a gateway test that we have basic math skills. And I agree. I think one of the best things you've done so far are the bands. So we can see growth and we can see proficiency at each one of those stops. Gets harder at the high school because really, to me, on track is after you've been there 3 semesters, are you on track? Because freshman year is a tough year for kids as they transition, and really at the end of their freshman year, I'm not sure that's the time to measure yet. But that after the first semester of their sophomore year, we're getting ready to say, hey, you've picked that pathway you're going down, that network you're going down, to which diploma you're going to actually achieve. And so maybe we need to, I love the PSAT. I think that's a good indicator as well. But I think we also have to look at our coursework that we said everybody's going to do this as a freshman, as a sophomore within our diplomas. And let's make sure we're on track, because the success of them getting to the finish line and getting the diploma is really the ultimate goal, right? What's our graduation rates? We've seen steady increases. Why? Because we've made it more relevant to kids, right? Our diplomas and all the different opportunities we give our students now with pathways and locally generated pathways, I think has helped bump that number up for us. And we don't want to lose that momentum. And so how can we keep a hold of that? And then, as Ron and I talked, growth's important. You got to be able to celebrate something. It's not proficiency. Don't get me wrong. Proficiency needs to be weighted heavier than growth. But at the same time, we've got to recognize and make certain that the student, as well as the teacher, celebrate the fact that we're moving that student forward who might be a little bit behind. And that's the work each and every day that we do.
I know you're not supposed to ask a question, I know the answer to, but could that be 2 separate grades? Could there be a growth grade and a proficiency grade? So when I look at those, I can see what schools are growing these students, and, because I want to know both if I'm moving into an area. Again, I don't know the answer to that.
Potentially, and Ron, you can chime in as well. We're, through this process, like we've done with multiple different initiatives, we look nationwide to try to learn from others. And there's another state that comes to mind that I won't mention. Since our state went after Illinois yesterday, I will hold and not mention another state that I'm going to go after today. But we were looking at another state, and it was, they had like grades for everything, indicators. And they found from their people, what started like a really good idea, they found from their people that it was confusing. But so if we balance that, maybe, but I appreciate the idea. And then let's pull a little bit more, let's pull that string that you were just talking about, Pat. As you were talking, it reminded me of this parent who was a newer mom, had a young student, I can't remember, kindergarten or first grade, but the child had gotten an A in reading on their report card. And they were like, I don't know what this means. Does it mean they're going to be okay? That they're going to be a reader? And this is something that we've talked about as a board on, really at those younger grades. It's not about what grade you get. It's about if you've mastered the skill or knowledge element. So I will just throw it out there for Indiana to consider. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to say, I'm going to make up a number. What are the 5 big knowledge or skill areas that you have to have in order to progress and be on track? I mean, we could have a state piece, but it really could be a local element to affirm that. But I'm throwing it out there for discussion.
I'm all in, get rid of letter grades K-3 and have performance tasks. I mean, I think that's one of the disservices that we do, is what is an A?
And that's local control right now.
Yeah, an A in my school district is different than an A in Perry or an A in Evansville or a B anywhere else, right? It's so subjective, but we really want to know what skills do they have? What can they do? What have they learned? That, it doesn't really matter. This is terrible to say. I'm going to say it because you know I will. Grades 4 and above, it's hard to recover if we don't get it right K-3.
Yep.
If we don't have foundational skills,
Yep.
then it really is tough for that child to continue to learn and grow without falling so far behind.
Yes.
And then it also identifies the kids we need to put into remediation during the summertime and even during the school day to continue to build their skills. That's really what's important.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. I'm looking at others who have not, go ahead, Scott. And, oh, online.
online,
We'll go after Scott, Byron, and then Erica.
Yeah, so, again, first of all, Ron, Mary, good job. I know there were a ton of conversations, not all of them extraordinarily fun, going through the process of this. And the framework is good, right? And I think, underneath this, the devil's in the detail, right? There is 100 layers underneath this that are all gonna come out as you start to take this out. Everyone can sit there and go, man, the framework's great, love it. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Like, how many points does this, like, you're gonna have to wade through all of that as we go forward. One of the most important things to consider with this is that a combination of the accountability system and a diploma drive the majority of the behavior within the schools, right? I mean, that's just, schools want to get a good letter grade. If we're going to put an A through F out there, right, which we have to, schools are going to make sure they do everything they can to get the highest grade possible. And so they will figure out, how do I manipulate in a good way, manipulate the scores of all these kids to maximize my grade, right? And so, you know, in the current system, you saw some, because there was a lot of weight on growth, where if you could get a kid to achieve and grow, you could get 125 points for that student, which means you didn't have to worry much about this other kid over here who was only gonna get 50 points, because like, oh, put those two together and it's still a good grade, right? And so you could see people leaving groups of students behind because from an accountability system, it didn't matter. I think bringing in the seals, you know, again, if in the diploma we said, look, these are critically important, we believe, because it's now part of the diploma, but you'll have to make that then part of, you have to incentivize schools to say, you really need to lean in on this. And I think the other thing I would say is making sure when you pressure test is that today's accountability system is mainly, you could predict the accountability, the grades of schools today with a high degree of accuracy based on their socioeconomic. And this system has to not be that, right? We want to give schools who, you know, to Pat's point, who have kids coming in not prepared and moving those students along the continuum, like those schools have an opportunity to do that. If you have a school that has a very low percentage of parents who went to college, which means that generally, statistically speaking, their students may not be on that path, where in today's system, it's really difficult to get a good grade at the high school level because of that factor. This says, look, if you have students who are achieving these SEALs and doing these things, they may not be passing the SAT because that's not on their horizon, but they can score well enough to say, look, we're doing a good job. We are getting students to achieve these things. So I think as this goes forward and we start having these discussions across the state, and again, the discussions get much more detailed. It's going to take longer than a 30-minute presentation to go through as you start going into the next level down. But I would encourage folks across the state to not get caught up necessarily in all the minutia of this yet, but to look at and really lean in, like, are we measuring the right things? Are there things that we can do in that K1 and 2 level to, again, is there a way to get growth from second grade to third grade, right? If everyone's taking iRead in second grade and in third grade, is there a growth factor that you can include there, right, that gives you another piece at third grade? to lean on. Anyhow, I think that the point of all this is it's a really good framework. I think getting buy-in from stakeholders is going to be obviously really important, but also getting them to focus on, are we doing the right things? Is it the right 4, 5, 6 things that that we know lead to success? And I think that's a big part of this. So, good job. I think it's on the right track. Good luck.
Well,
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, go
and
ahead,
I would just
Ron.
say, Scott, I mean, I think I have the utmost optimism because of the momentum that we're coming off of graduation requirements and partnering with each of you and partnering with the folks across the state to take something high level and actually get down to the details successfully and create a broad coalition of folks who are bought into that. So I think there's a lot of momentum for us to build on to do that, but you are exactly right.
Yeah, thank you. Byron, online.
So this is super exciting. And I think the thing that's most exciting is the fact that we're now having conversations around much different topics, much different tensions, as Katie brought up, than we've had in the past, right? Like, I think back when we first started looking at graduation pathways, which I kind of consider the start of all of this movement, or at least at the beginning of the movement, we've now moved away from what I called at the time remediation factories, right? Which is really what we were doing with our schools and our students. And I think the genius of this is the no universal expectations. So I can, as a school, I can be looking at every single student and I can be getting credit for how I get that student ready. And I think that's beautiful. And that truly is student-centered, and I want us to remember and continue that. And then, Ron, when we met the other day, I promised I would bring these up, and I actually drew a triangle of some things, and a couple of these things have already been said. I love Pat's thought of the essential skills. That's what I'm going to call it. We called it that when we were reducing standards and really looking at that, is what are the essential things that students need to learn? And I think that's something we need to continue to work toward. And to me, that raises the bar, because then we can say, does every student know this at the end of 3rd grade or 2nd grade or whatever we want to use as grades? The other point of the triangle for me is to continue to make sure that we look at growth to proficiency, because I think that is, while I believe in growth and we have to meet every student where they are, I think we need to continue to keep the goal of proficiency. And then the other piece that I want to, I'm now coining another phrase, I want to make sure that we don't get into seal chasing either. Because if we truly say we're going to be student-centered and we truly say we're going to have no universal expectations, we are also going to have students, because I just was with a counselor yesterday or the day before, and we were discussing how some students they have wouldn't quite make it to a seal, but we're going to be ready to go straight into a career area with that. That's not Byron saying I'm against the SEALs, because I'm not. I'm for them for all the reasons that have been talked about. But I also don't want us to ever get into a situation where we then have become the SEALs the only way to go, because then I think we become a factory again, and we get away from that no universal expectation. So those are just some things that I've thought about as I've listened to the discussion and what have you that I think are super important. But I just want to restate that how exciting this is. The things we are talking about are so different than the things that we were talking about 7, 8 years ago when we thought about accountability and so forth. Thanks.
Thank you, Byron. Erica?
I also want to share how much I appreciate the work that the department has done and the direction that we're moving in. I do like the framework, and I believe it is a great way to move, especially pulling out that 3rd grade data so we can see, to Pat's point, if children don't read by the end of 3rd grade, then, you know, we have quite an uphill battle. And so being able to pull out that data and see that data for parents and other people in the community I think that is really a great change. And we know the ultimate goal of schools is really to just help students succeed in our educational system. And when it comes to accountability, that's when things can get a little scary for schools. Schools are really under that pressure of making sure they're performing. And to Scott's point, sometimes schools know how to manipulate that data and make it look good. And it's normally at the expense of other students, those students that aren't like those bubble kids right there. And we just need to get them over that hump so that they make the cut score and then they make our school look good. I really feel like really celebrating growth as well as proficiency is definitely the way to go, because now sometimes resources are taken away from children that aren't quite there or can't make as many growth points. As a special educator, it's something that I'm concerned about. We want to make sure those students go to all children, even those students that are able to make those cut scores, but those students that may be a little further away, and maybe take more resources for them to learn. We want them to be able to have access to those resources also. And so that is why I'm really in support of these changes. Accountability is huge. It is necessary, but we want to make sure that it's always student-centered and not just the better student-centered, but all student-centered.
Thank you, Erica. Pat, you were leaning in. Did you want to add?
Just on some of Scott's comments here, I think one of the difficult conversations we have to have is that if you have excessive growth, but you're not proficient, we cap what letter grade you can get. Because when people see a school that has high growth and we give them an A, we think, well, they're proficient, because look, they got an A. And that's a long time, trait that we think A means they've got it all, and it may not. So I think at times we have to separate that and say, you know what, if you're not hitting proficiency, then you can't get into the category of A. And that's a hard conversation for us to have, but I think it's something we've got to consider, because just what you said, the public's like, sure, well, they're an A. Well, that must mean that they've hit all the standards and they know what they're doing at that grade level. And that's not always the case with the old system we have. So I think it's a conversation we have to have about what is the proficiency. I'm huge about growth. I mean, I've stated that for the whole time. That is important that we grow students all the time, but it may not be able to get you to a category of an A or a B. It may be that you're at a C and we somehow designate the reasons why.
Yeah, good thought. Thank you.
Dr. Jenner, could I?
Yeah, Katie.
Because it feels connected to what you just said, Pat, and then the triangle that you voiced, Byron. And I think another tension that we're going to have to wrestle with is between the seal chasing, but the realities of economic demand. And that connects to growth and proficiency. So I think we have to be cautious in this moment of building this measurement system, that we stay true to the realities of when you graduate high school, what happens next, and making sure that, those seals are important because it's what the economy values. And so schools should prioritize getting as many students as they can those seals, because that's what helps them be prepared to succeed. So how do you differentiate chasing from preparing students to be successful, which is the whole point of this entire endeavor? So anyway, no answers to that, but I think that's something else that we're going to have to discuss.
BJ.
Completely agree, and I think that Katie answered that question, and when we laid out what are those skills. And I don't think we need to, what are those 5 or 6 skills we want these students to have, and I don't think we need to guess about those in high school, because you're right, the economy will tell us. They know what they want. The end user, the employers know what they want. Let's not try to guess what those things are. Let's ask them and lay out, like Katie just said, those 5 or 6 things we want every single student to have. And again, keep it simple. What are those 5 or 6 things that are going to make students successful? And Ron, you said you've even looked at students that are going into the workforce or going into college. Are we making sure that we're looking at that the metric is success in those areas, not admittance? Because there's a big difference between getting into college, if you have $25,000, or being successful in college. So as we look at that metric, I want to make sure that we're looking at the students that are experiencing success on all levels, military, enlistment, and enrollment.
Yeah, as we move forward with that work and we start to have more conversations, we'll definitely introduce, design, and if there's questions about, oh, well, what about if we ran it like this, what does that tell us? And we can start to do that. But your answer is generally yes, BJ, but with some considerations that we can absolutely discuss.
Could we do that with academic mastery also?
Lean in a little bit.
Because one of the things that Scott mentioned that really hit home was like the SAT is not important to every single high school student that takes it. Let's be honest, we give it, and it may be federally mandated. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a tool that we use. But that's a college admittance exam, and if that's not my path, it's not real important to me. So can we create another test, again, going to our industry partners and say, what math do you want students to know that are coming to work for you at Lilly? And have them help us build that test, because that SAT, let's be honest, is a college admittance exam. And we're saying in here that we recognize all three of these things equally, yet we give a test that's college admittance to say academic mastery. So how can we create another test, or not another metric?
That's right, yeah.
Thank you for catching that. Another metric for the skills that Katie alluded to earlier. Does this student possess these skills? I think that's the question we answered, because let's be honest, whatever we put in this is what's going to get done inside buildings. And we know that. So let's make sure we get that right.
I saw a couple hands maybe raised online again, so I can't tell who. Erica, it looks like you were one. Go ahead, Erica.
I was just gonna say, I appreciate BJ's point, since we know those proficiency scores that we're looking at are students on track to do well on the ACT, which is a college entrance exam. And we're saying that we're being student-centered and that we are looking at all students and what they need. And some people's path is not college, but are they prepared for life? Are they prepared for what they want to do? And so we need to look at that all-encompassing. Just being able to really appreciate the growth that students make, because they may not necessarily be able to go to college or aspire to attend college.
Thank you, Erica. Was there another hand online? No, Byron. Kristen, anything? No? Got it? Okay, anything else, board members?
Yes.
Pat?
Thank you for the conversation.
Yeah.
Right, this has been really good today.
Good.
I mean, just for us to all kind of have an idea what we think about accountability. So thank you for the conversation.
And to be clear, and as a reminder, this is the start of the public discussion. These discussions have been going on for months and months with stakeholders. This is the start of the public discussion. I think, Ron, did we provide a way that people can weigh in, or at some point we will certainly do that, and that deeply matters to the process, as we've shown over and over again in development. So thank you sincerely for the discussion today as well.
And if I can make one last point on a technical point
Absolutely.
to say, reiterate your point, Dr. Jenner, this is not the launch of any type of formal process.
Correct.
That all that will occur, input will still be taken through all of those more formal processes. So this is the launch of a
Discussion, public
public,
discussion.
informal public discussion, and based on the recommended framework. And I think we've provided some key shifts for folks to react to. So I just wanted to reiterate.
Thank you. All right, on that note, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Byron has the motion, which, second, all in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.